welcome to No Mama Grow Mama. This is the place where we talk about all things related to health and wellness for you and for your whole family. So in today's episode of the show, we sat down and chatted with Krista, who is a sleep consultant for children. This was a really interesting one for me because I knew the service existed. I just didn't know a lot about what took place in a sleep consulting session or how long it was. As a mom of three, I do know how important sleep is for me personally. So when my children don't sleep, what do I feel like the next day? This was a great interview with Krista, and I hope you enjoy it and take something away from it. Thanks. Hey everyone, Jen Matthews here, Chief Salsa Mama at Salsa Babies. Welcome to No Mama Grow Mama today. Okay, today's show I'm very excited about filming. So I have with me Krista Gunther from Sleeperific. Tell me, is sleep not a humongous hot topic among parents? Of course it is. That's why I'm so excited to talk with Krista today. So Sleeperific. I stumbled upon Sleeperific probably, I don't even know, a few years ago maybe, when I was teaching more locally for our classes. A thing popped up on my newsfeed on Facebook that Sleeperific does like a Talk Tuesday. So every Tuesday night, they will go on for an hour and answer one question from parents, like from a bunch of parents, but you get one question on sleep for free. Like, what an awesome service is that, right? So you don't necessarily, well, you are recommended to go if you need a sleep consultant, but if you just have one pressing question, they'll answer that question for you for free. Like, I just thought that was the coolest thing. And it always, when I watch the shows happen, it's always a hot topic. Like, there's never enough time to get to everybody's questions. So, Krista, that was the first time I kind of came upon Sleeperific, and I was super impressed by you giving back to sort of the community and the online community, really. Just people having questions about.
Awesome. Did you get to ask your question?
I didn't have a question because my kids were older, a little bit older then. But it came across my newsfeed. I forget what I was doing, and I was just very interested in how you were doing it and the awesome, obviously, giving back to people and just being online to help. So yeah, I thought that was really cool, really cool. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and tell us a bit about Sleeperific?
Yeah, so I'm Krista, and I have 3 kids. So this company was sort of born out of my second. He's my son, and we had it was a circus at our house trying to get him to sleep. He had some health issues, and I always chalked it up to that, and I really didn't qualify it as a sleep problem. It was, I thought it was a health concern, but it really was a sleep problem, and I worked my butt off to try and fix it ourselves. I didn't really realize people existed that were sleep consultants. At the end of the day, it was sort of like, wow, this is really powerful, and I feel like I could help families. And at that point, I had a bunch of friends who were in the same space as me. We were just having our babies and all struggling with sleep, like you said. That's such a hot topic that resonates with so many families. Just really helping them sort of very informally. And then I decided, you know what, I think I might be interested in doing this kind of seriously. And I took a course, and here I am now, 6 years later, doing this on my own and with Sleeperific.
Awesome. So when you said so many people struggle with sleep, I would venture to guess in a family setting, I would be hard pressed to believe that with more than one child, you would not have struggled with some kind of sleep issue at all as a family. So I think even in my own family, from when they're little, transitioning them into a crib. When they're little, keeping them in their bed at night. That's probably the hottest one when I'm on the mom groups and, chatting stuff about our classes. That's probably the hottest one. How do I get my kid to stay in bed at night? And, they'll come out and we'll put them back to bed. And then 10 minutes later, they'll come out again. And they're coming into our bed in the middle of the night. Or we co-slept and now we need to get them into their own bed. Like, the topics of sleep can be endless. And even in my own family, we have older children and we have issues that we still struggle with. I just think it's a great topic, but sleep is for our family, we value sleep just as high as proper nutrition. Those things both feed your brain. If you're not feeding your body and your brain healthy and you're not sleeping healthy, you can't have a great output. Talk to me about the importance of sleep then, just in the general perspective in life. Why is it important that we make sure that our kids do get proper sleep?
I love the way you mentioned that proper nutrition, is as important as good sleep. Sleep is to the brain what food is to the body, right? You give your brain poor sleep, you're going to have poor output. There's a lot what we know about adult sleep, because you find me an ethics board that's going to approve a sleep deprivation study for children, right? And that's just not going to fly. So a lot of what we know about sleep, we have to take adult sleep studies and kind of infer it back to children. But we know that if you sleep 4-6 hours at night, you might as well be drunk, because your ability to process cognitively is probably the same. So we're looking at sleep needs then from a child population, which are sometimes twice as much as adult sleep, and precious, developing minds that are growing, doubling, tripling in size in the first year. I think we can only infer what that sleep deprivation is doing to their bodies and their minds when they're not sleeping well.
Right. It's so key. It's funny because as we've been raising our kids, so our oldest is 11, the next one down is 9, we have 3 also, and our youngest is 5. Our rules have always been, we would rather put them to bed early and then wake up early to kind of gauge how much sleep their body needs, rather than to set a bedtime, let's say, that's standard for someone their age, and then we have to wake them up in the morning. So we've, as they've grown, kind of consistently kept that bedtime the same. Even our 11-year-old, she's got to go to bed at 8. She may stay and read in bed for half an hour, but she's still waking up at 6:30. So I can tell her body needs that rest. And until she's waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I don't know. But I think that's the thing, right? Like, we just don't know. And that's why someone like yourself and a business like yourself is so key, especially when they're younger and they maybe can't tell you, or you can't figure out what's going on, can be so frustrating. I think that's why having someone like yourself available to you as a resource to come and say, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know. I'm not sleeping. They're not sleeping. Nobody's functioning properly. Life sucks right now.
Absolutely. And that, goes back to the original question there about how important sleep is, because when a child's not sleeping, it's controlling the entire dynamic of that family, right? Nothing else matters, because mom's sleep is terrible, dad's sleep is terrible. The parents are having poor sleep because their child's not sleeping. So then that family's not functioning and thriving the way that they should be.
Right. And that translates into other activities of life, right? Like, if you think about it just from a basic perspective, if you're tired, do you really want to take your child out to the park? Probably not. No, you want to sit in front of the TV, right? Do you really want to take your child out back and kick a soccer ball around? Nope. Let's snuggle up and have a nap together on the couch. So yeah, it's totally a huge piece of the puzzle. And I think it's something that as your kids get older, you really start to realize the significance of that. Can you talk to me about the age and stage? Let's start with sort of a baby. The majority of our audience is probably young moms with babies and toddlers. What does sleep look like? We hear different things like, oh, my baby turned 3 months and now they're not sleeping anymore. Or they turned 6 months and they're sleeping for 12 hours. Can you talk to me about just generalities with sleep and sort of age?
Yeah. So, again, this is kind of what we infer and what we think we know about approximate averages, I guess, sorry, I'm a hand talker here.
That's okay. I am too, very much.
what we know, based on sort of averages. So the average infant, and I would consider that from the 0 to 6 month. In the initial stages, you might have an infant who needs 18-ish hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. By the time they're closer to 6 months, I'd say about 14 hours in a 24-hour period would be allocated to sleep. And then honestly, that 14 hours doesn't change that much until we've got probably a full-fledged toddler, 18 months on our hand, and then we might start to see it's kind of drift down from there. By the time a child is 3 years old, I think that's where you start to see more variations in terms of sleep. There might be kids Like my daughter, who's my youngest, is 3. She still needs a nap for an hour and a half in the day, but will still sleep about 12 hours at night. So her sleep needs are pretty high. But I think you're also going to encounter a 3-year-old who doesn't need that hour and a half nap in the day and still might only need 12 hours at night. So I think you start to see a bit more variation then. But yeah, collection of naps and hopefully long night sleep. I mean, I would say up until, sometimes families about a year are doing night feedings. So your wakings at night might include a night feeding, but ideally, the other times at night are really prioritized and allocated to sleep.
Right. So let's go back and talk a little bit. You said, your one daughter needs, still a nap and still sleeps really well at night. In my own family, I found that with my 2 children as well. So my daughters were both born in November. So they were later babies in the year. And when they went to school, I would actually have to bring them home because they wouldn't make it through the day, especially my middle one. She couldn't, even if into grade 1, sometimes I would have to keep her home from school because she was exhausted. Kindergarten, she would sleep for same thing, probably 2 hours in the afternoon. So this is a kindergarten, JK, SK, 2 hours in the afternoon, and she would be that child that went to bed at 7:30 at night, and we would have to wake her up at 7 o'clock in the morning. So how do you know, though, if they're just, what's the best way to phrase this? How do you know if they're fighting it because they want to stay awake and they don't want to have a nap, but they really need it, or they really just don't need that nap anymore? What's the best way, or is there a best way for parents to determine that? Because I've seen it in my classes too, especially our Salsa Tots class, where we'll have moms say, oh, my 2-year-old doesn't nap anymore, but by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're just a mess. So my experience with my own children says to me, then there's something going on there, because that shouldn't be, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. So how does that work?
Yeah. So how do we determine if our kids are well rested or
Right.
if they're just, having a bit of a negative relationship with sleep, right? I think I look at a few things. The child as a whole, obviously you want to consider, just how well rested do they seem, which this is not always easy to determine. But I would look especially at their behavior late in the day. Probably around when they're getting home from school, you're trying to make dinner. There's a lot of stuff going on in the average family's home at that point. And are they becoming increasingly, we call it like emotionally volatile at our house? Like,
Beautiful.
are they going to turn on a dime, or is something going to set them off and get them really upset and fussy? Are they becoming clingy at that point? If you've got a young child, they want to just be with you and be held. That's a really telling time of day to indicate some overtiredness. And I would generally say kids who are happy, playful, still getting along with their siblings or their peers at that time of day, that's probably a good indication that they're fairly well rested. But the kids who are becoming a little bit more difficult and challenging at that time of day, that's probably a good indication that they could use just a little bit more time allocated to sleep. I loved how you mentioned about waking up early in the morning and looking at that time of day. Do you have to wake them up on their own, or are they waking naturally? So if your child's waking naturally, and one of the factors to look at is something called sleep inertia. So how quickly do you wake up, right? You and I know this. We've had 3 kids. When you wake up in the morning and you're forced to wake up because your kids, like are up too, but does it take you a long time and that coffee to kind of get going? So is your child taking a long time to really transition into wakefulness? That sort of sleep inertia is a good indication. If they're well rested, that's a lot more quick. If they're taking that long time, maybe that's an indication that they would need a little bit more sleep in their schedule.
Right. So for families who maybe don't understand or haven't really seen the significance of proper sleep yet, can you talk about what happens developmentally when a child is consistently not getting enough sleep or not getting enough quality sleep?
Right. Well, again, this is something that we infer because we don't, there's not necessarily studies that would back this up, that would, sort of parents are voluntarily sort of saying, well, my kid's only getting 8 hours of sleep and I'm going to volunteer to participate in this study, right? So there's not a lot of great information about what happens when kids don't sleep, but I can tell you what happens when kids do start sleeping well. And this happens I feel like this happens like 9 times out of 10 when I'm working with families. I'm quite often working with young families and children under the age of, 1, 2, or 3. But some of those milestones that they may have missed or that may not have happened yet, or they're 6 months old and they're not rolling terribly well, suddenly they start getting more sleep and they're mastering all of their mobility skills that they just hadn't acquired yet. They were too tired to do them before. Right? Or I've had families articulate to me too that, I thought my kid was doing okay and they were just sort of this, less content baby, but it turns out they were just exhausted and they weren't getting enough sleep. And then, their mood is elevated as well. So it does play into some of the cognitive things, emotional things that are going on, their capability of learning, mood and just overall health and wellness too. Children who were always getting sick, now that they're getting well rested, they have better defense mechanisms in their body.
Right.
Sleep is powerful.
Yeah. Oh, I totally get it. I totally get it in my own house. I think it's such a topic that there's so many more questions that I think that I would want to explore with you, but because we have such a short time frame, we really got to get to the good ones. But sleep is it's one of those things in our house where we don't fool around with sleep. Like, no parties are more important than sleep. Yeah. Is there any correlation between improper sleep habits, development, whatever the word would be, when kids are younger, translating into an adult? So adults who don't sleep, for the recommended, or can't sleep for the recommended period of time, not being able to go down and go to sleep quickly and easily at night?
That's such a great question. And there's tons of evidence that actually indicate that infant sleep problems become childhood sleep problems if they're not dealt with, right? That become adolescent sleep problems, that become adult sleep problems,
Really?
Right? There's so much evidence that correlates those things, that if we're not stripping back to the basics and looking at what the problems are in the early stages, they can continue to persist. It doesn't mean, and I'm a firm believer in, this is still something that even adults and adolescents, we can still fix, we can still improve and work on and make better. And I'm sure you see this too, that changing habits as an adult is really hard. It's a lot more difficult and it takes a lot more time for habits to change as an adult comparatively to what we would see in children and infants. We're looking at 3 to 4 weeks for habit change for adults. We're probably looking at, really 3 to 4 days for habit change for babies.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Can you talk about some signs or symptoms that parents may be seeing and not recognizing, or maybe they are recognizing it and they just aren't relating it back to lack of sleep? Signs and symptoms that sort of parents can look for to say, oh, wow, yeah, no, my child isn't getting enough sleep or isn't sleeping properly at night.
That's a great question too. Falling asleep in the car, you're just like pulling out the driveway, driving on your street, and that kid's passed out in their car seat. That's a great indication that they are overtired. This is one that parents don't often think of, but you think a child who appears sleepy would be getting inadequate sleep. Well, children who actually appear hyper are often getting inadequate sleep, right? That, or sometimes you may have noticed that they've gone through a bit of a stage of fatigue where they were maybe sort of mellow or docile or looking at a book and maybe almost falling asleep, or in front of the television and almost sort of passing out. But then they hit this stage where they're wired and full of energy, right? And that's the cortisol, the noradrenaline, another hormone called adrenaline, they're all stress hormones in our bodies that are active stimulants, and they're going to keep us awake. And it's that second wind syndrome, right? You've felt that too. We've been out. I was
going to say 3 p.m., right? Isn't that what everybody talks about? Is that 3 p.m.? Yeah.
Second wind, right? Yeah. So, if your child is actually then getting to that overtired state, you're going to have a more difficult time, and they are going to have a more difficult time settling down than for bedtime. Because once those stress hormones are there, they have to kind of run their course. And unless we consistently start getting that child more sleep, those stress hormones continue to build up in that body, right?
That's very, very interesting. Yeah, because really, I mean, it's no different than adults, right? Especially parents. How many of us rely on coffee at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or else we just need a little siesta, but we don't have time for that because the kids are coming home soon.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and you know what, I think you've hit on something that's really important too, that as a culture, we don't necessarily prioritize sleep the way that we should, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'll choose social media and Netflix over going to bed early quite often. And I'm a sleep person. Like, right. I know the value of this, right? Yeah. So it's a hard trade-off to make as an adult. And it's something that children obviously find that difficult to how we relate to sleep. It's so important that we set a good model for them, right? And be a good role model in terms of prioritizing our own sleep as well.
Right. And I guess as an adult too, really for us, I'm going to guess that it's really about helping them learn what feels good with sleep and the proper habits, and developing that sort of sense of self-awareness that you need as you get an adult, so that when you are an adult, if you want to go out for the night, you know you're going to feel like garbage the next day because you didn't get enough sleep. But that's okay. We know it's one night, and we know what we need to do to take care of ourselves afterwards, right? So maybe is that kind of what it is? It's just
absolutely. I think, yeah, you're touching on the whole idea of sort of self-regulation, right? That that there's payoff and consequences, right? So I understand that in this instance, my choice is to stay out late and do this with my friends or family, and I may need a nap the next day or an early bedtime for a few days following, right, to recover from that. So just sort of being able to help them build that awareness in the earliest stages is so key.
Yeah, to learn what doesn't feel good so that we try to avoid it when we can.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Now, on the flip side of that, I know as an adult, if I've slept too much, I don't feel good. Is there such thing as too much sleep for children?
That's a great question too. I mean, sometimes when we're looking at a child who's got too much sleep, there's been something else underlying, some sort of medically based issue. And if I have run into those clients, which are very rare, I would say in the years that I've been doing this, I've probably only had 2 where I've sort of flagged it and said, you know what, this quantity of sleep, although it, on paper, it kind of looks amazing and what the transition has been, I'm a little bit concerned about the quantity here. And I think we maybe need to pursue, from a medical perspective, some more testing and just really figure out what's going on with this sleep in this instance. So, you're right. Too much of a good thing is potentially a problem as well.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Can you talk about developing, like, what do good sleep habits look like for a child? How much should a child be sleeping? What should the environment be like? There's all kinds of things with the white noise and putting on radios or not, and lights on and not, and comfortable beds and fluffy pillows and not fluffy pillows. What should we be doing for our children to develop those good sleep habits?
In terms of sleep environments, that's a really, like, it seems like such a small thing, but it's actually such a big thing, right? The small stuff is the big stuff sometimes with sleep training and promoting healthy sleep. So having a great environment is really key. Dark is so important. Dark is going to boost our melatonin production. Melatonin is a hormone that's always being produced in our body. When we make it nice and dark, we put that production into overdrive. So it's just going to make it easier to go to sleep. It's going to make it easier to stay asleep. And we're hopefully going to boost the quality of that sleep as well when it's nice and dark. Now, as children get older, sometimes I would say beyond 3, the idea of having fears is really realistic to them. Something under their bed, something in their closet, maybe a nightlight is going to give them a little bit of security, and that's fine. I think a nightlight is okay. I would recommend a low wattage bulb. I would recommend something too that is more of a yellow or red or orange based, as opposed to like a blue or green based, just because it disrupts sleep just a little bit less if it's on sort of that sunset spectrum. Yeah. Having a nice quiet environment too is great, but not necessarily silent. So I love the white noise. But I always recommend something that's super boring, something that is also has a very constant noise. So if we think about like waves crashing or a thunderstorm or raindrops, like sometimes there's enough of sort of this volume fluctuation, but if you've got a dog barking or a car alarm going off down the street, that's going to kind of creep in and still sneak in because you've got these tonal variations, right? Where if you got this nice sort of constant white noise, it might just act as a little bit more of a buffer. So something like true white noise, like sort of a staticky sound is actually a great option there. So dark, quiet, and cool too. Not keeping it super warm in there. If, you've probably woken up where you've been too warm. I think this time of year is really tricky for that, right? We had a warm day yesterday. It was warmer in all of our houses. I woke up at 3 a.m. and I was sweaty, right? So, not having it too warm in your room. Ideally, the temperature to sleep at is around 68 degrees, which is around 20 degrees Celsius, which is actually pretty cool. In the winter, summer, that might be sort of too cool when we've got those extreme temperatures, but ideally keeping it about 1 degree Celsius cooler than what you keep your home during the day.
Really? Only 1?
Yeah. I mean, if you're keeping your house at, something really warm, like 25, maybe going down to 24 is still a little bit too warm, but know that the ideal temperature is somewhere around that 20 degree range, and just adjusting what your child is wearing accordingly, right? And their coverings accordingly. If they're wearing a sleep sack or if they're still swaddled, just making sure that they're not going to overheat in there as well. Overheating is a risk factor for SIDS too. So for those young babies, we just want to be careful about that.
Right. I think when my husband watches this, you just gave him ammunition, because I like to keep the house very cool at night. I'm one of those people that even in the wintertime, in the fall and in the early spring, I like the window open because I like my room nice and cold. I like being under my sheets and getting all snuggly. So we keep our house at 65. And he's always said, "Are you crazy? That's too cold." So when you said 68, now I'm going to have to raise the temperature in my house because it's not going to contribute to proper sleep.
If it's working for you and you're not waking up cold, I think you're probably fine, right? You've adjusted, it sounds like you've got, a nice heavy blanket, you're probably wearing some pajamas, like you're probably fine. Yeah. So, I think that's key too. If what you're doing is working, we don't ever have to fix what isn't broken.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. Hopefully
that's for your husband.
Hopefully he doesn't see this part then. Okay, so tell me, how would someone know, or what would be happening that someone would maybe need to think to themselves, I need to get some help here. I maybe need to talk to Krista. I need to find a sleep consultant to help me. What are some things that would be going on that a parent would maybe need to say to themselves, this is out of my scope of comfort. I need help.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think whenever it stops working for you, right? If it's working for you, if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. That's okay. There's lots of parents who would, be contending with lots of night wakings, and, naps might not be great, but everybody's coping and everybody's doing well. And, the sleep training doesn't really work for them. So that's, that's okay. But if you're finding, you are the person that is contingent on that child's sleep because, they need you to nurse them to sleep. They need you to hold, rock, bounce this particular way to go to sleep. You're finding it difficult to be able to even go out for coffee with a friend, or being able to, sort of step away. That can be really challenging and anxiety filling, right? To be sort of feeling trapped to a certain degree. If you've got a ton of wakings and it's not necessarily for any real purpose, there's sort of, they need to be resettled in some way. Those might all be flags that this just isn't working for this family, and we need to get this under control. Sometimes for families, I'll be honest, especially here in Canada, the driver is often, we've got that year of maternity leave that a family member is going back to work, and nobody, in a childcare situation is going to be able to facilitate sleep in the way that we've kind of been doing it. So, around that 10, 11 month mark is when I kind of see a lot of panicked parents kind of reaching my way and sort of saying, this transition is going to be hard. We need sleep to be under control before we really make that transition.
Right. But I think sleep too, from my experience with all the moms in our classes and stuff like that. I think sleep sometimes is, or the lack of good sleep, or grumpy children, or that 4 o'clock in the afternoon thing. I think a lot of people think that it's just a rite of passage. It's part of parenting. It just sucks, but everybody goes through it. So, head down, keep going. We'll get through this eventually. Can you talk a little bit about that mindset? Because I feel like I don't want to impede in conversations when I hear that kind of stuff happening. But I feel like there's got to be a better way.
You're right. There is a better way. And I don't know where that sort of badge of honor seems to come from, that, we wear our exhaustion like it's some sort of merit badge.
Mm-hmm. You've got this, Mama.
I'm not sure that's, like, it's just, does it come from our society, sort of like, that colleague of mine who pulled an all-nighter working on this presentation, he worked his butt off. Like, we should celebrate that. Like, no, you're actually an idiot. You shouldn't have drove to work. That was unsafe. You're making bad decisions. You're going to underperform and probably blow your presentation today because of that, right? I mean, we're not valuing sleep in a way that we probably should. So, I kind of think that's where that really comes from. But, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have to be that way. Sleeping through the night, and I mean sleeping through the night, like 12 hours at 6 months, is not an unreasonable thing at all. It's not an unreasonable expectation. Or, having a 4-month-old who wakes up twice in the night to feed, and that's over a 12-hour period. Those are not unreasonable expectations. I think, just to kind of touch on this too, because you're working with a lot of women, like, I think I see those things as a feminist issue too, right? That why are we exhausted about this? Because 9 times out of 10, it will be the woman who is dealing with those children with those night wakings. We can't achieve the things that we need to as women in our careers, in our personal lives, in our, whatever we're trying to achieve, if we're exhausted, right? So, I'm not sure why that's become a headspace that we seem to be in, but I'm here to tell you, and I hope you can keep telling parents too, that it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, I think that's why this interview to me is so important, because like I said, I see these conversations in moms groups, and it's that, you got this, Mama, and keep going, you're doing a great job, and everybody goes through it, don't worry about it, just keep doing it. And there's never the conversation of, hey, did you know that proper sleep is something that everybody can have? And maybe if you're struggling and you're at your wit's end and you don't know what else to try and nothing's working, there are professionals out there who can help you with that. That's why this conversation is so important to me, because we just hear even in our classes, forget about the mom groups online, we hear so many different conversations. Like, I remember hearing where moms would say to me that their 4-month-old baby doesn't nap during the day anymore. And I'm just, I can't fathom what that would be like.
No, I think biologically too, babies are wired to need those naps, because they're like, the demands of parenting that age of child, you need the breaks, right? You need some downtime as a parent where you can regroup and do some laundry, wash some dishes, prepare your next meal. So I'm with you, and I love the supportive dialogue that you're hearing. Like, that's, great, keep up the good work. But, I would love for it to just shift a little bit. Like, that sounds so hard, but did you know that, that this is something that you might want to look into, that it doesn't have to be that way? That would be great if we can kind of sort of take that to the next level, that support.
And really, I think we've seen it in our own classes too. It really has to be about the baby for the mom to understand. And so I think the phrasing of the conversation for the most success should be, this is about your baby's development. Your baby does need to nap because they're learning so many things. Their brain is still growing, still developing. They're looking around, learning the world, learning so many different things. That's exhausting. And they need, for proper development, to have those, just like we need breaks and just like we need our naps, they need that for proper development too.
There was The Nature of Things by David Suzuki.
Yep.
So he did a great episode on sleep once, and there was an awesome study that they highlighted I think they had 2-year-old children, and they taught them this little activity, and half of their population was napping, half of them were not. The nappers nailed the cognitive activity and they nailed the learning. None of the non-nappers, none of them were able to learn this activity. So, this is significant. And those were 2-year-olds, right? Who needed 1 nap a day, right? When we're talking about a 4-month-old whose world is exploding and probably needs 3 to 4 naps a day to not nap at all. I mean, it's challenging for the parent, but you've got to think that it's got to be challenging for that kid to be getting through the day. How are they able to put all these connections together and tackle their world in an appropriate way?
I think I'll see if I can find that. Maybe after we're done our show, we can see if we can find that show, because that sounds like a great link for people.
I'll link it to you, because I know in his little web segment, it was the first, so it's sort of like 5 minutes in. So I'll find it for you, no problem.
So we'll put that in our show notes as well, and parents can watch that. Also, obviously, as we always do, we'll put Krista's contact information in there as well, if you want to chat with her and maybe check out her services. So what if someone wanted to come and work with a sleep consultant, what would they expect?
Typically the way I work, and not all of us sleep consultants are approaching this in the exact same way, but when I work with families, I typically recommend that we would work together at least a week. We've got some initial sort of preamble that we need to go through. I have an intake I get families to fill out. I am getting to know your family fairly well, at least on paper, pretty intimately, and some details in there. So you have to be pretty open and honest. And I develop a plan that is specific to each family. A lot of the times, though, we're covering a lot of the same things, right? Like sleep environment, developing great routines, having great timing. Those seem like small things, but those are actually the really big things when it comes to sleep training. Inevitably, we have to have some sort of option in there and how we're going to deal with the crying component, the protest component, because whenever we're making change, it's going to be met with protests. And for children this age, those protests, they manifest in tears. It's not like, Mom, I don't like this. This is something kids cry about, right? So, giving families some options to deal with that. I will say that's one of the biggest myths that I hear about sleep training, is that it always means cry it out. And it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't. I quite often, my families are reaching out to me because they've heard of co-sleeping. They've heard of cry it out. They're not comfortable with either of those, and they're looking for something in the middle, right? Yep. So, we try and structure something that allows quite often families to be supportive, parents to be supportive of their child while they're learning some new skills, which I think, that's great if a family has the availability and the bandwidth to do that. Mm-hmm. And then, we're working together for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, especially for my older kids, toddlers, preschoolers. They're going to take some more time. Those habits just have been lingering a little bit longer. But also you think about the ability of a toddler or a preschooler, like some of those 4-year-olds, if they don't want to sleep all night, they may be able to power through it, right? So yeah, and then I look at this very empirically too. I get families to fill out a sleep log on a daily basis, because I do think it's something that we can approach very scientifically. The numbers say it all. Emotionally, it might feel still pretty badly after day 3 or 4, but if we're seeing improvements in our numbers and in terms of their settling time, in terms of their durations to sleep, nap quantity, night sleep quantity, those are all things that we really look at, and we're trying to troubleshoot too. How's your child doing with this, and trying to adjust our plan accordingly if we need to.
Right. So interesting. So interesting. That would be one of those things where I'd like to be just a fly on the wall to just watch the whole process and to see from start to finish the changes. It's just an interesting.
It can be really exciting and really validating to, take a family who I talk to parents on the brink all the time, right? Sometimes like mom's got a foot out the door, dad's got a foot out the other door. Like these are families that are not functioning well as a family unit, and we can get the sleep back on track and they can start moving forward and thriving again, which is such a great gift to be able to give people.
Well, really, that just shows you how big of an impact sleep has on families, right? And, or better yet, the lack of sleep has on families if it's that serious. Yeah. Okay, Krista, so we'd like to end our show each week with, if parents were to watch the show and they were to only remember 3 things from this episode, what are the 3 things that you'd really want them to remember?
That's a great question. Because I would have like 6 things, but I'll pick out the top 3. Okay. So I think consistency matters. That's probably the most important one. Like anything, if this is habit change that you're trying to help your kids learn, you can't have a conversation with your baby and say, this is how it's going to work. Your only tool to really teach and help them learn new habits is your actions. So being consistent is absolutely key. And then you sort of following that, when you do commit to sleep training, you can't try it. You have to go all in, right? There's no halfway about it, because I would say doing half or partial, stopping, restarting sleep training, that's more detrimental and more difficult to sort of bounce back from than, just sort of embracing it and going with it from there. So that's probably the number one, that consistency is the most important. And I think the second one we sort of touched on too already, but sleep training doesn't always mean cry it out. Right. There's lots of options with various levels of support that parents can try. I think too, for a lot of children, that if you close the door and, it's sort of like a see you at 7 a.m. and that child has consistently been held or nursed or rocked to sleep, that's a really steep learning curve, right? That's a really steep learning curve for your child. And I don't think that you necessarily have to go there, at least not as a first step. Maybe that's sort of plan D that you'll try if you absolutely need to, but I do think you have lots of options to execute before that. And then probably the last thing is, we sort of touched on this too, but the little stuff is the big stuff with sleep training and with learning to sleep and building healthy sleep habits. That having a great environment, having awesome bedtime routines or nap time routines that you go through, having, ideal timing for these kids, that's going to give them opportunities to be really successful with their sleep. And to be honest, a great environment and good routines and great timing, those things can promote sleep. But the bad side of that, is that if you've got an environment that isn't working for your child, or routines that aren't really on point, those things are going to deter from your child's sleep too. So, those things are really small or seem really small, but they matter so much.
Right. Excellent. Those are excellent points. Okay. So if you're watching this show and you're wondering, what is my first step? I would highly recommend, so you will see this episode on a Friday. The following Tuesday, I touched on at the beginning of the show, I want you to go on Facebook and I want you to go find Sleeperific. And I want you to go and watch how supportive Krista is with the families that come on and ask these questions. Remember, this is a free service. She's doing it just to give back, just to help families. Go on and check out her Tuesday. I believe it's 8 o'clock, right? Do you not do it at 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening?
Yeah, and it's the first Tuesday of each month.
Right. Okay. So there you go. Go on and find it and just go watch how supportive she is. I think it's a fantastic thing that she's doing. We're going to put Krista's contact information in the show notes, just beneath the video as well. So you'll be able to find Krista and access her resources if you're sort of in the area. And if not, I'm sure she can help you. I guess that's actually a really good question. If people are not from, so because we have instructors and this gets shared sort of internationally, so certainly outside of Ontario and outside of Canada, how would someone find a sleep consultant in their area? Is there like a board or an association that governs sleep consultants where they can find, a good sleep consultant? How would someone find?
That's a great question. So I've worked with families internationally. Geography doesn't necessarily matter a whole lot to me. I've worked with families who are in Africa, Europe, Asia, South America. So there's a lot of things that we can do just over the phone and via email, which is great. But if you are looking for somebody, who you'd maybe like to meet in person, there is the IACSC, the International Association of Children's Sleep Consultants.
Okay.
And these are folks that have gone through some sort of training for pediatric sleep consulting. They also have a priority of continuing education as well. So that's a real sort of bar, I think, that's important to set in this industry, that these people are looking at what's sort of the newest and latest and greatest in pediatric sleep research. And you can search by geographical location on there as well, so you could find somebody in your area if you're looking.
Excellent. That is great information. Okay, so I will put Krista's contact information and Sleeperific's contact information in the video link at the bottom. Krista, thank you for sharing with us today and chatting. Like I said, there's so much on this topic as you're talking that I thought, oh, I want to ask that, but no, this question, and there's just so much. And I'm sure parents are the exact same way. So thank you very much for your time, for chatting with us today and sharing and helping families learn a little bit today on our No Mama Grow Mama show.
That was my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Have a good day, Krista.
You too. Bye-bye.